Coframe started out as this more abstract idea that the internet in the future, instead of being this kind of static, unadaptive thing that requires a lot of people to help optimize and create, is going to have its own sense of life and intelligence. We call this idea living interfaces, and it's something that has driven us and been our North Star since basically day one. The origin story of it actually starts here at the AGI House. We were hosting a dinner. I was one of the founding members of AGI House, as you know, and I was responsible for coordinating a lot of the dinners. And at these dinners, you have these incredible people who are just luminaries in this space, and the discussions that we have always create and then spark new ideas. And at one such dinner, we were talking about the future of consumer experiences on the internet in the age of AI. And at some point during it, my mind started wandering, and I started to think about what the internet could be like if I were 10 years into the future or 20 years into the future. And the thing that struck me the most was that it would look nothing like it does today. In fact, it looks a lot more like interfacing with a living being. I think there's a distinct possibility that basically at some point in the future, everything digital that we're interacting with is sort of like an entity that you're able to communicate with, and it self-improves, and it's totally personal. And it's almost a little bit like Jarvis in Iron Man. You know, Jarvis being this intelligent assistant that's able to adapt to you and figure out what to do in every situation. And that's something that got me extremely excited to build and get into the weeds with. The way I started with it was simple. I wanted to start with an interface that everyone is familiar with, the humble website, and a simple way to allow that living aspect of it to be brought to life in the form of a website. So what that was for me was being able to let the website self-improve, meaning specifically it would have some form of feedback that it's getting from the users that it's visiting, that are visiting it, and then pull that signal back into the system such that it can, adapt itself in real time. So it would create variations. Coframe allowed websites to create variations of themselves, essentially. Test those out, see how they converted or whatever metric we're trying to optimize for the environment, and then continuously learn based on that. That was the original emphasis of the idea, but it's of course expanded quite a bit further from there.
Yeah. And what kind of were you seeing in 2023 that made you feel like the internet agents was not only a possibility but a likely potentiality?
So something that I've had to learn is adapting to the pace of acceleration that we're experiencing right now. The pace of acceleration, not just acceleration as it is as a point in time, but the pace at which that accelerates, the second derivative. All of the predictions that people make tend to undershoot. And so when I was thinking about this idea, maybe without having a lot of experience looking at how fast things were moving, it would be like, okay, this is how it's going to be in 30 years or 50 years. But I've been in this space for about 10 years now, and over the course of time, seeing things just accelerate really, really dramatically, things that I would have expected to take many, many, many years just happen sooner. And so it made sense to me that this would be the case sooner rather than later. As far as why this specifically, I think it's more of an intuitive thing. Like when you think about how we're using things, using the internet today, it's doing services. It's allowing you to accomplish goals. That is being taken more and more off of one's plate. I think that's basically what the internet does. It allows you to scale and take things off of the plate, automate things, and so on. And the nth iteration of that would be something that is literally just like an assistant, or at least that's how it appeared to me.
Rio, when you before CoFrame, you were at the GSB. You founded the Stanford COVID Response Lab and then Access with an autograph. How do you feel like in those experiences came together for your insights?
Yeah, the common thread for me and something that just constantly drives me is how people interact with the digital world. That's something that is deeply fascinating to me. Before I started doing any sort of business building in school, my research was primarily at the intersection of AI and human-computer interaction.
Oh,
Yeah, and so it was always trying to ask this question of like, how are people engaging with the digital world and interfaces and so on. I'm kind of like a bit of a design junkie as well, UX junkie, sometimes to a fault. And that combination is just like the perfect fit for, of course, what we're doing on Coframe. How it's manifested over the years with my first company, Access Bell, we were ultimately trying to reduce the friction in medical appointments, allowing people to do real-time transcription, translation of telemedicine calls, especially in areas where it was like more difficult to have, they had less bandwidth and so on and so forth. So solving that UX problem. With Autograph, we were trying to solve the problem of digital ownership. It's something that was at the time, and I think it's still to an extent is difficult for a lot of people to get their heads around and for them to approach in a way that they feel safe. The space was challenging because people who are versed in technology had just had to find time navigating it, but the everyday person did not. We built a really great UX that allowed more people to participate. And of course, that's what we're doing here at Coframe. Is we're kind of going a level up and helping other businesses improve their own user experiences.
One kind of like framework around like AGI experience is Matt Billman's 4 pillars of like access, context, tools, and orchestration. I have in mind like where does Coframe shine, and where has the technology like been most challenging?
Yeah, so I would say that we focus on 2 areas, which are, well, that's it. Actually, I'm going to split this up into 2 chapters.
Okay.
There's the chapter that we're working on today, which is helping businesses take what is more of a human-facing interface and trying to just continuously optimize it and learn over time. And then there's the chapter that is going to open at some point in the future when we start to see more proliferation of agents being used by consumers and more commerce done through agents. And that's going to be a very different chapter. The first chapter is really just leveraging agents to do things that would otherwise have been done manually. And so we're working less with agents today. There just aren't that many agents on the internet doing things on people's behalf in a commerce setting. And in the consumer space writ large, I would say the main killer app of agents is actually more in research. People going and asking ChatGPT or Claude questions or Perplexity or whatever, and then the agent goes out and gets a bunch of sources. I mean, it's a stretch to even call this an agent. It's simply like search at scale, and so that is definitely emerging, but it's not reached the mainstream yet. I believe that once we start to see agents do transactions on people's behalf at scale, there's almost no transactions happening today, but I think that at some point this will happen. Early signs of this are like the partnership between Shopify and OpenAI and so on. We're going to start to see some very interesting behavior around how people are using agents to interact with other businesses, and businesses in turn needing to have the right infrastructure to interact with their agents. And so within that framework that you mentioned, the 2 pillars that we focus a lot on are context and tools in that case. So on the context side, we're pulling in the business's context and trying to internalize it for the agent so that I can go and actually connect with the needs that the consumer's agent has. Like a consumer's agent, they're trying to solve for some type of need. They have a lot of context on the user. And the job of the business's agent, that is representing the business, is to try to understand the meaning or the need behind the ask, and to go back and forth. That's what humans do when they do sales, And then tools are also very important because you can't just have awareness of what the problem is and surface the information. You have to also allow the consumer-facing agent to achieve the goals that it has. Agents have goals, and that's why they exist. And so in this particular case, I'm talking, of course, about commerce, but this is broadly applicable. The job of an agent representing the business in this case would be to enable and yield the tools that the consumer-facing agent needs to do what it needs to do, right? So those are what Coframe has to be excellent at. It is exposing the right context for the consumer-facing agent based on the context that the business has, and then once it's sort of like convinced the other agent to purchase or whatever the transaction is, giving it the right tools to be able to accomplish that.
Wondering, like, how does your team think about designing agent evaluation frameworks so that the human stays in the loop at the right time? And
That's a fantastic question. There's actually a lot of different steps involved in what we do, which is basically growth, website growth in particular. To just break it down really quickly, the first step is coming up with ideas of what to try, right? In the conversion rate optimization setting, that's like coming up with experiment ideas. In the personalization setting, it's coming just up with different variant ideas for different segments. Then you have to come up with designs or sort of like build out the concepts of these ideas in whatever interface you're working with. Then you have to actually build them out for real to be deployed in a production quality way. Then you have to actually deploy them. Then you have to analyze the results, and there's kind of like that process just goes as a loop. So each of those steps has its own basically approval processes, or like I would say things that you could set up evals for. Let's talk about the idea part of it first. How like the impetus to actually make some type of change to the user interface or the user experience. This part of the process is actually a lot more like trading, quant trading. I wrote this article not too long ago about the parallels between quantitative trading in finance and growth. In particular, there's this notion in quant finance or in finance in general of alpha. Alpha is basically a signal that you have as a firm or as a strategy that allows you to outperform beta, which is the overall market. In this case, beta could be thought of as the original user experience, and alpha could be a signal that you have or ideas that you have to outperform the performance of that user experience. And when I say performance in this case, in quantitative trading, that's just dollars returned or whatever. It would be in this case conversion or revenue to the business or something of that nature, whatever you're measuring for, whatever KPI. There's a whole lot of other parallels between quant finance and growth. Some of them being the fact that you have a portfolio to manage, like a certain amount of assets under management. In the case of growth, that means traffic, or I guess shots on goal. Could be resources that you have to actually build things out. So you have to be able to pick the right ideas. In a similar way to quant trading, you have to have insight to pick the right strategies and allocate some of your portfolio to those strategies. So the evals for that can be actually quite similar to those in quant. In quant, you have this notion of a back test. A back test is looking across the history and trying to figure out how well would this have done. In the case of growth, you don't have the ability to really backtest as much, and be able to say, if I made this trade in the market, or this trade meaning created this variant and ran out on this traffic, how well would it have done? But you are able to assess how the ideas that were actually produced and tested did within that group, and then see if your LLM is able to reproduce those.
And that's where the simulation comes in.
Yes, simulation, exactly. So you're able to do that pretty well, and have an LM as a judge, basically assess how good this is doing. There's lots and lots of ways that you can set this up, but the basic idea is this parallels to backtesting. Then you have the next step of it, which is design and engineering. I'll kind of group these together. They are a little bit different, but it all comes down to QA, or quality assurance. We worked really closely with OpenAI to create this new model that is specifically good at creating on-brand UIs. So writing out code that feels on-brand based on the surrounding context. What we did to train it was actually a kind of a funny version of next token prediction or masking. There are these transformer models. Bidirectional ones that mask a certain token, and they have the surrounding context, and the model's job is to predict that missing token. Mm-hmm. And we basically did this, but for entire website sections. We would mask an existing website, we'd mask one of the sections, and the job of the LLM would be to predict that section given the surrounding context. And there was sort of a goodness of fit function that was based on the design quality that we utilized for that. and it produces really high quality stuff in comparison to the base models. So that's how we were able to do that. And so it was there's a natural data set, which is like literally all the websites out there. There's also a really nice like definition of quality and so on. So that was like a pretty successful application of fine tuning a model and an eval set for that. Then you have normal QA. A lot of the sort of benchmarks around engineering benchmarks that exist are actually great for training models that are great at coding, obviously. The same type of thing applies here. And so being able to produce code that fits within the web contexts, and the model's able to use a whole lot of tools like the Chrome dev tools and so on, running JavaScript and inspecting element and so on. And so that's just a kind of like I would say more traditional, I say that loosely, but a typical like coding benchmark. And then you have the human part of this. So after it's gone through, you have the idea, you have the variation created, then it gets to the human. And that part ultimately is still pretty manual. You have to have someone from the team of the enterprise or the company give a final thumbs up or thumbs down, give feedback. But the nice thing about that is that we're able to take that feedback and feed that back into our system, and it learns about that signal over time, and it is able to improve and get better and better at producing, quality of a level of quality that is accepted at a higher rate, increasingly. So that's basically our approval workflow end to end. And of course, once we run the actual experiment or variation or whatever, we take that signal and pipe it right back into the start of the system to create the new ideas, and that becomes a continuous loop.
How has Coframe thought about these challenges, kept ahead of the curve, or is excited about the future of multimodal optimizations?
Yeah, Coframe is a multimodal native company. Like we are actually the first model that we created, and from basically from scratch. Well, sort of from scratch. We cobbled together a couple of models for this, but in the early days, UI code generation models weren't able to really take input, visual input, and that of course changed with I think GPT-4o Vision was probably the first one to really take that kind of multimodal input. Before those days, these models just weren't good at that, and that's a very crucial thing for Coframe to be able to do. So we took I think a version of Llama and a clip model or a SIGLIP or one of these kind of image models, image embedding models, and smashed them together and then trained, or I should say post-trained this model to create what I thought at the time was a pretty good UI code generation model. And the thing that we learned in that experience is that you don't want to compete on the model layer, because within the course of about 3 months after we created this, OpenAI, I was fortunate to get a call from them because I have a bunch of friends there. So luckily we were able to actually work with them instead of working against them. But some of my friends gave me a call and they were like, hey, or actually I was egging them on saying, hey, we have something that's better than what you have. And they're like, not for long. And then of course, inevitably, they eventually came out with 4o Vision, which we partnered with and worked with the team on. It's a really great relationship now. But the lesson here was you don't want to be in the warpath of these big model companies, right? You want to be building stuff that's going to benefit from that advancement, but not sink cost into trying to compete directly and head on. So the models are actually very good at multimodality now. Video is probably still iffy, but for anything vision related, they're very, very good. And we use them extensively, both for input and output. I would say that the workflow that I described earlier, there's so many steps in it that you can't kind of really consider it one big input or output. It's right now it's fairly complex, and so different parts of the workflow have different needs from a multimodal perspective. Some don't really have any multimodal input. Some are literally just evaluating images and then giving QA on the design of the output. So it depends on the part of the workflow. But I guess that the main lesson here is to not be in the warpath of these models in the big labs, but rather kind of bet that they're going to get there.
Gotcha. And then
Okay. So I'd say at a high level, the reason we're able to get such large wins for our customers is because there are just brand new types of strategies that weren't feasible before, that just didn't make sense to even try. Of course, where we're operating, which is website optimization, at least today, we're primarily responsible for creating variations of the existing site experience. The way that this is done traditionally is you'll make smaller tweaks to the site and build up incremental knowledge about how things work and how things, which things work and which things don't. And that's a really good strategy. Don't get me wrong. It's actually something that is fantastic for machine learning as well. It's like a hill climbing strategy. But there's another strategy that has emerged for us that was, responsible for the huge wins that we had with Intuit in particular. But also I've seen this work really well with other really large companies, customers that we have, which is just being able to throw massive swings at the problem, like throw dozens of completely brand new pages, full pages, instead of smaller changes on your existing page. Like that type of strategy would be completely ridiculous to bring up in a growth strategy meeting at a traditional company, because they'd be like, where on earth are we going to get those resources? Like even just like coming up with the ideas for this, for all those pages is going to be ridiculously difficult, much less designing them, building them out, QAing them, all the different steps that are required. Now, it's obviously a lot easier also, of course, today with Claude Code and Claude Design. But even with these off-the-shelf models, like it gets you 80% of the way there. That's not good enough for enterprise. You have to be 100% of the way there, which is why being able to do it really, really well is a huge competitive advantage. But because we've been able to do it very well, those net new strategies have allowed us to unlock incredible growth for the companies that we work with, in a way that like I just don't think that anyone expected. Usually these programs that are intended to drive conversion and optimization, they'll generate 10%, 20% conversion a year. And we're seeing lifts of 50, 100, 200% lift in conversion within a couple months. That just isn't possible with the past. And so it's more of like okay, so there's a couple ways to think about what is new with these models. One way to think about it is you take something that is inherently a human process and automate it, right? That's like, doing the same thing but much faster. And that's great. Then there's taking something and then coming up with a completely brand new way to do it entirely. It's such that it's superhuman. It's not like they could do it slower. It's like they wouldn't do it at all. They wouldn't be able to do it at all. So there's like augmentation, and then there's completely different category type of strategies. I think there's tremendous value to be reaped with both of those strategies. But what we're seeing the 10x returns are on the second bucket, which are superhuman like capabilities.
right, and that's kind of like going towards your future vision of like internet of like all agents and like what assisting humans like would look like in that vision thing.
Yep.
Okay, and I just want to kind of call out you had the recent like Haystacks AI acquisition, a big moment. Congrats. So it sounds like it really scales up like the amount and diversity of training data that the team can bring into like building out these like self-improving agents. And so, what capabilities are you most looking forward to this new like combined team?
Yeah. So the reason that we did that acquisition is because we see something changing fundamentally in the world, which is that every function of the company, every part of the company has the opportunity to be automated and level up at the same time. The Haystacks acquisition is primarily focused on the go-to-market function. We see a tremendous amount of value in automating our sales process, our growth process. In fact, before we even started thinking about that, I had done a bunch of work building various agents that are internal to automate our growth and sales processes, and have been seeing a tremendous amount of value in it. Now, Bo, who founded Haystacks and is now on our team, built the platform with a vision that he could help automate basically business development and sourcing work for sales. And he did this in a very thoughtful fashion, very, very technical. And they were able to, search across millions and millions of data points, throughout GitHub to identify likely buying signals and intent signals. Now, we're not selling to developers, and so that particular type of data isn't as useful for us, but the structure and the way that the agents work is very, very useful to us. And this program is already seeing incredible results internally. We've turned it on and sort of are seeing reply rates and pipeline generated that is 2 to 3x what we were seeing before with similar processes. Millions and millions of pipeline are already being generated from this. So it's just been a very, very strong success.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I guess with this, are you curious to experiment in other types of follow-on products too? Because you do one project and then the next project people might hey, we love these results. What's the next step?
Yes. Well, our roadmap is very ambitious. We are starting with websites specifically because we think that that's a really foundational part of commerce today. And we know it is. Trillions and trillions of dollars of revenue go through digital, through web surfaces every year. But that's just the starting point. We're starting there because it's kind of a hub and spoke model. It connects to all these different channels that the business has. It's very closely tied to the data, the ground truth data, what you're seeing for purchases and revenue and so on. But there are many channels beyond this. Paid media is another huge channel. Generally speaking, paid social and paid search. So is lifecycle. So that's like email, messaging, SMS, et cetera. So are apps, phone apps and so on, as well as in-product surfaces. And then eventually we're going to get to this point where, like I mentioned, agents are likely to be doing more of the commerce than people are directly, because they're going to be doing it on behalf of people. And it's going to be easier for me as an individual to simply go to my chat client like ChatGPT or Claude and say, hey, I need this bike for a triathlon that I'm training for. I wouldn't even tell it the background context of myself. It would just know it from previous discussions. That's really the power of this, is that it can have such rich context on me that it's able to then go and scour the internet in parallel and at scale and talk to all the different agents out there that could be selling things and figure out what is the perfect fit for me. And I think that's going to be the winning strategy, or at least the winning strategy for businesses entering into this world is going to be having an agentic experience, an AX as we call it, that is suited for the just torrent of consumer-facing agents that is coming, and all of the commerce that's going to be done through them. So the companies that are thinking about this early, I think, are going to be in a very advantaged position in the internet of agents that we're entering into.
Yeah, I know.
That's a great question. So the analogy that I used to recap is looking at the automotive industry. So cars are great. They get us places. They're very important. It's probably over $1 trillion of market cap that they, in value. However, they are quite expensive. They're very slow in traffic, at least in human-constrained environments. They can be very, very high liability. And they are very limited in the sense that you're only utilizing them about 3 or 5% of the time. Otherwise, they're parked. So there's an egregious underutilization. Now, if we were to imagine a world where autonomous vehicles existed initially, I think it'd be very different. Autonomous vehicles are great. Waymos get us places without us having to drive. But the problem is that because these vehicles are still driving on the roads and the infrastructure that was built for humans within a human-constrained environment, moreover, they still get stuck in traffic. They're still parked a lot of the time, maybe less of the time, because they're basically being Uber instead of sitting there for the most part. But and they're still quite expensive. And so if we were to think of a world where autonomous vehicles were the first-class citizen, I think it'd look a lot different. And there's actually this company that Khosla just invested in, one of our investors, that is trying to reimagine what transportation looks like from a first principles perspective alongside existing transportation networks. And the striking features are that the roads are much more narrow. You have cars going quite fast that are of course narrow as themselves. They're going very fast, and they're sort of like bumper to bumper going fast. That makes a lot more sense. No traffic, and they're in utilization 100% of the time or close to it. So this is very, very interesting. Now, to do this at scale for the entire transportation network, I don't think is feasible. Like, you're going to have to completely overhaul all the roads, especially in cities. It'd be basically impossible unless you had some clever trick or like above or below, people, maybe the Boring Company will do something like this. Now, the thing that's interesting about agents is that they face the same types of problems. They are similarly crippled in human infrastructure, but they're not blocked by the same restrictions. The infrastructure to make this better is not blocked by the same restrictions that you see in automotive. What I mean by that is, if we were to think about, from first principles, kind of novel infrastructure for an agent-first world, we could just build it. That's why we have this hackathon today, right? Software is much, much easier to build. And so you actually could have a concurrent internet running for agents that is alongside humans. And so what does that internet look like from first principles? We're of course building that today. There are a lot of topics that need to get solved. Identity and authentication is a big one. Security is going to be another big one. Payments and sort of like general commerce is another huge one. The protocol layer, like how do they talk to each other, all the tools, environments, multi-agent systems, agent negotiation. There's a lot of different things that need to get solved, of course, but for the most part, I think that the technology is pretty much there. So it's really just up to us to build it. Like I was saying, I'm kind of shocked that we don't have more consumer agents proliferated. There are probably some other things that are blocking, but for the most part, based on what I've seen, the agents are quite good at doing what we want them to do. Now, I'd say that the only things prohibiting full utilization are maybe the fact that we've had to solve a lot of really difficult computer use problems. But that's because computers and sort of the internet and the web are built for humans. So if we were to solve that problem, where could we go? That's a big question. That would maybe enable this internet of agents much more quickly. I see computer use as a band-aid to this problem. It's like trying to get around the constraints and assuming that they're sort of like they exist and they're permanent and unmoving. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think you could have a website version for humans and a completely different website version for an agent when you type in, website.com or when an agent searches website.com.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot